Over on Twitch, I've been doing something called Metaphor Mondays. It's been a lot of fun being able to revisit Metaphor in new and different ways. And this week, I talked about the best and the worst dungeons and why they are what they are. And so, if that's something that interests you, keep watching this video, of course, but also go follow me on Twitch so that you can watch and be part of the conversation live. But with all that out of the way, let's just dive into it. We have set the scene, we are ready to do it, and we are starting with the northern border fort. It's pretty straightforward, all things considered, but I think that the execution of it as a tutorial level is really, really well done. Because, obviously this is your introduction to combat in general, but it slowly drip feeds you mechanics in a way that I feel is relatively satisfying. And because this is where you end up awakening to your archetype, I would have to put it for narrative significance and the fact that this is where your relationship with Stroll actually begins, and that those kinds of foundations are set. It's not the best dungeon in the game by any stretch of the imagination. I would say it is, and I feel like this sets the tone for a lot of the tier list, right? I would say that it is a B tier dungeon in the game. It's short, it's sweet, it has good narrative beats, but when it comes down to it, it doesn't have much in the way of narrative significance that other subsequent ones will do. Because you don't have the archetype, even though it's cool that this is what leads up to it and you're able to kind of use igniters as you're kind of moving through the dungeon and you get to experience how the rest of the world kind of uses magic, I think that's cool. But because you don't actually get to get into the nitty-gritty, just from a gameplay perspective, I think it's a B tier, even though narratively, I think it's a good foundation for the rest of the game. Homogorlio, awesome boss, but it's also super easy. It just introduces you to the types of bosses that there are going to be, and I almost kind of feel like it's a waste of the design, to an extent, because it is so easy. Like, this crazy, intimidating monster gets beaten by a level 3 will. Moving to the Nord Mines. This dungeon, honestly, I think is underrated. I think this is massively underrated. I would agree, Isa. I think that this is the better tutorial dungeon. This is when you actually get to dig into all of the archetypes. This is when you get to start assigning them to the different party members. And this is when how Will's presence is able to affect the people around him so that they can awaken to archetypes. Because shortly into the dungeon, this is where Stroll is able to realize that the degenerate general, was there and was familiar with his hometown that was sacked and ruined by a human and didn't go to help. And that's what led to Stroll's awakening, which, let me tell you, the protagonist's awakening, it was good. It was fine, you know? It was impactful, it came at a good moment, cinematically, awesome. Stroll's awakening is probably the best awakening in the game. That could be argued, but I think that Stroll's awakening is one of, if not the absolute best awakening in the game. Just him standing in front of the fires of the memories of his town being burned to the ground, and when he like grabbed his heart from his chest and like it almost like erupted from him, it was so cool, and it's such a moment in the game. I think just the visual alone, it's the most iconic looking awakening in the game. And then we actually get to start playing around with different archetype combinations, because now we have the mage and we have the warrior and the seeker, and we get to see what works with different kinds of characters. I think that's so cool. Yeah, I would never skip Strolls because it is just that good. Sometimes I just watch it for fun, and maybe that's nerdy to say, but it's absolutely true. So with all of that being said, right, that's only the first half of the dungeon. As you go through it, this is when you're introduced to the fact that standard enemies can be dangerous, and you do not want to be caught off guard because they will absolutely punish you. I think that it is a true introduction to combat, the pros, the cons, and how you actually have to strategize. Then the human that you fight later on, it teaches you the front and back. But the best part is the dragon that you can either fight or that you can try and kind of like sneak past, stealth past. This fight is not the hardest. It's really not that hard. On normal, it's not even that difficult on hard mode, but it gives you that choice to see, hey, can I test my skills? I wish it showed up more throughout the game, like these kinds of choices, like do I fight, do I not? It happens a couple times, but this is the primary time where there's a very tangible reward for you doing those fights. And I loved this dragon because I felt so smart and like I was so good at the combat, even though that wasn't necessarily the truth. When I beat it, it felt like an accomplishment. And it introduced you to the fact that dragons exist in this world and that you can't just beat them down. The set pieces, the story, all of it in this dungeon, it introduces everything so well that I honestly, I'm gonna put this in S. I think it's that good. I just think that the only detractor is the fact that it is a cave. Visually, it's not that extraordinary, right? It's a cave for all intents and purposes. There are ways that they could have made this a little bit more visually interesting in pretty straightforward ways, because even navigation-wise, it's just kind of crawling under rubble. The map itself wasn't that engaging. A map that I do think was very engaging in this game, though, was the Regolith Grand Cathedral. This is the dungeon that I feel like, in terms of navigation, really set the standard for all of the dungeons in the game moving forward. Because the map of the Grand Cathedral, while it is just kind of a large brick building, you know what I mean? You know, there are religious elements here and there throughout, but outside of a few rooms, it's never that overt. It's just kind of a grand building that you're moving through until, you know, like very key points in it. Navigating it, though, was so much fun. So much fun. And your introduction to it, going through the mausoleum and being confronted by the reanimated Grius so that Hulkenberg could get her awakening. Well, I don't think her awakening compares to Stroll's. I think it was good. I think it was impactful. And them illustrating to her and telling her in no uncertain terms that the prince is alive is such a fascinating moment for her character, because it's her entire worldview just shifted. Right? This thing that she has blamed herself for and has beaten herself up over for years at this point, suddenly there is a path towards redemption, and now she once again has the rationale to live, because she had just given up all hope of living in that moment as Grius was about to strike her down. And so the fact that at the very beginning of this, she was given that moment to live, and that is what caused her to awaken, I think was so well done. It also serves to show just how horrific and unsettling Zorba's powers are, and what lengths they will stoop to be able to meet their agenda, I suppose, because Zorba's working under Luis. That's very transparent. But still, going through it, seeing some of the religious kind of paintings on the wall that show kind of the fallacy of sanctism so early on, if you really take the time to look at it, is interesting, because sanctism is a way to kind of control the masses. You know, they acknowledge igniters in the church, which ends up kind of alluding to this idea that the church benefits from the sale of igniters and the use of igniters, which is horrific because while they are things that can help in society, they also do an irreparable amount of harm. And so seeing that so early on, I think was cool. And then everything with Zorba was fascinating, seeing how much of a zealot he is. And the Homo Avades fight was really, really cool. That being said, I would have to put this also at B. I'm also putting it at B. I like it a lot. I could talk about how much I like it forever. But I think that there are a lot of dungeons in this game that are just better, and I don't want the list to be so top heavy. So, Grand Cathedral is better than the Northern Border Fort. But I think that there's enough of a difference between the Grand Cathedral and the Nord Mines that kind of bridge that gap that would be better suited in the A rank. So I'm putting it tentatively in B for right now. Which takes us to, it's a dungeon that's not in the same vein as these other three that we've kind of mentioned, but I think it does belong here. And that's the giant sandworm's belly. And the giant sandworm's belly is... It's a weird dungeon. Getting eaten by the sandworm and then meeting the dude who eventually becomes the man you will give all of your golden beetles to over in Brylehaven, meeting him in the sandworm's belly because he's essentially an entomologist that really loves bugs. And so being able to be in this human sandworm, unholy marriage is... Everyone's just like, it belongs at the bottom. I don't know that it belongs at the bottom, but there's also not a crazy amount to say about it. I don't mind the timer. I think it's a funny little thing. I hate how we exit, because stomach dungeons are just disgusting. It doesn't actually really add that much to the narrative outside of the fact that we were tricked by Morris, who is in Martira, to come here. No, so where I was going to put it, I was going to put it in C, because at least it's different from everything else. But if you cut this dungeon out of the game, and you just made it a fight with the human, what would be lost? Some moments of comedy that hit for some and miss for others, which I think is fair to say. Not a whole lot would be lost from the game without the giant sandworm's belly. Because, yeah, it's like, it had to shit us out, Hey, guys. But it could have just been we drove the sandworm away, and that was it. And that way, we would still have to come back and fight it later in the game, like we do if you go through Barden's kind of, his social link. But nothing's really lost from taking it away. Actually, I think it being here lessens the Great Sandworm's Nest, the Giant Sandworm's Nest, which is the next dungeon on this list, which I struggle to even refer to as a dungeon. I think without the Giant Sandworm's belly, the Giant Sandworm's Nest would have been able to be a lot more horrifying. The dread of it would be a lot more pervasive in the game. And now it's just kind of Heismay's home. that supposedly have sandworms in it. We see sandworms in some cutscenes, but really it's just Heisme living there. We get to explore his hut. This is where we meet him. This is where we battle Heisme, which I love the fight with Heisme a lot. A lot. With him doing the duplicates of himself, and you have to figure out which one has the shadow to be able to make sure that you're consistently landing hits on him. I think that fight is great. I love the comedy of them banging on pots and pans to be able to get him out of hiding after they beat him the first time. And just in general, everything with Heisme I think is fantastic. I think this is a really good introduction to him. And for that reason, it's a basic dungeon that we don't get much from, but the introduction to Heisme and Heisme as a character just in general is so good, in him understanding why they came to get him and turning himself over to them. I am going to put it I'm gonna put it in C. Because I agree, DGC. I agree. Because the fight is strong enough that it does its job well. I don't think we can blame it for the giant sandworm's belly detracting from any length that this dungeon could have had, right? I would have loved to see it be a bit more expansive and them really dig into the sandworm element a bit more, but that's kind of what the giant sandworm's belly was made for, and I don't love how they did it there. It's fine. It exists. It's something that we get through when we replay the game. And so I think C is really the best place for it right now. Cren Castle and the Martira arc as a whole, I think is easily the best arc in the game. Maybe for another Metaphor Monday, that's what we should do, ranking the overall arcs. But right now we're doing dungeons. We're just doing isolated dungeons. And so if we're just talking about the dungeon and what happens contained to that dungeon, I think that Cren Castle excels in a lot of ways. Because when you enter Cren Castle through the well, this is where Heisme actually awakens to his archetype. And it's probably the most horrific dungeon in the game, by far. Like, without a shadow of a doubt. Because when we enter and we see Morris quite literally carting unconscious children to their deaths, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. It bothered me. Like, and I don't say that in a hyperbolic way. Like, it quite literally bothered me how evil this man was. And we come to learn that it's all just because he's in debt and needs some extra change. And so he helped out the Sanctoress do her dirty work and stole away all of these children from their parents who he knows and lives with in this town just for his own benefit. Deplorable show of humanity. It kind of makes you think as you're going through this dungeon, because there are two ever-present figures as you're going through the dungeon. There's Morris, and then there's the human. Right? The human, which is in shadow as you're moving through the dungeon throughout the entirety of it, and it's looking for you. You gotta stay out of its line of sight or it initiates a battle. And if it initiates the battle, then you're in a bad spot because it will mercilessly kill you unless you're prepared. And it makes you think about the fact that which is the worse monster, right? Is it the human that is eating these children, or is it the man who is feeding the children to the monster, right? Who's worse in this situation? I would argue that the scarier one is Morris, the person who is knowingly choosing to feed these children to the human, knowing the impact that it will have on the people that he knows in this town. He knows what he's doing, and he's still doing it. He's not racked by grief like the Sanctress, which is no excuse to her, but he is choosing to acquiesce to what she wants just because it's going to be a payday for him. And that duality of who is the real monster here that we explore through this dungeon, as we're seeing both of them several times throughout, is really interesting. Aesthetically, this is one of the better looking dungeons too in the game, because it has two halves, sort of. The sewer element underneath Cren Castle, where you kind of go and you have to lower the water level, which I think that's funny because it's one of the only puzzles in the game, and it's barely a puzzle. You just kind of have to go around and technically have to pull some levers, but a puzzle it is not. And then once you go up far enough, you actually get into Cren Castle, where obviously they're lying in wait for you. You find out that it's actually the Sanctress behind it, and you fall into jail, so on and so forth. Typical game stuff. Oh no, there's a trapdoor. But it works so well. Also, this is a dungeon that actually gives Gallica something to do. Like, it happens a couple times throughout the game, but this is the first time Gallica has a very tangible thing to do, and I was so stoked about it, because she was actually able to be helpful in this scenario. She's able to do it. We unlock, all the cages, we save our teammates, we do essentially the arena, laying out the monsters with our teammates and fighting them in that way. I think it's really cool. And then there are jars in this area that just have bones of people, of children that this human has eaten, and just the atmosphere of that, just the bones in the jars, really subtle. You might just break them and never have looked at them, but it's horrific. And the fact that we hear Captain Klinger, who we met earlier during Stroll's Awakening, we hear him off screen get viciously and viscerally eaten alive by the human, and we see the blood swath from his cage, essentially. And then, of course, everything with the Sanctress. We get into the castle. All of her notes and the notes of, and the pictures and the baby stuff, and how we learn about what happened to her true biological child and how this has led to her adopting this human. It's so well done. It allows us to draw parallels between the Sanctress and Heismay's situations, and how you can take two routes based on grief. She took a route that she could not cope with her grief, and so she tried to fill the void of her lost child. He isolated himself. He is working to improve himself. She is essentially creating more versions of herself in the parents that she is taking children from. And it's just, this arc and this dungeon in and of itself are full of parallels. Who is the true monster here? Grief manifests in different ways. How is it manifesting? Are her actions justified? No, but are they understandable? Can we see how she got here? To an extent, yes. Now, I don't think that, finding a human, calling it her baby, and then feeding children to it was the move. I don't think that's really forgivable, but it's so well done. It's an easy S tier for me. Aesthetic, it is easily better than the Nord Mines. Cren Castle is just so well done in every single way. Every single way. I I would say, and spoilers for the rest of the list, I think Cren Castle is by far the best dungeon in the game. It's fun and interesting to navigate. There are a lot of different aspects of it so that it's not just going through the dungeon. I think it's so well done, and it keeps you on your toes narratively. The only thing that I hate is that there is no benefit to actually killing the baby early in the dungeon. While it's in Shadow, the fight is way tougher, and the rewards are essentially nothing, so it's not worthwhile to do. Don't fight it if you don't have to. On a New Game Plus, do it because it's going to be easy on a New Game Plus because you have all your weapons and stuff and you can kill it quick. But if you're going through the game just naturally, don't waste your time. Don't waste your time. That is the one thing about this dungeon that I hate, is that it does not reward you for going out of your way to fight the baby. It doesn't want you to. You can do it, but it doesn't want you to. And as someone who went out of their way to do that, I would have liked a reward for coming out successfully because I used a lot of really good items to keep myself alive in the fight. Because they'd trained us through the dragon to expect great rewards for going out of your way to fight things that you didn't need to. So, I don't know. I didn't like that they teed that up with the dragon and then didn't follow through in this dungeon. But that's just me. So, moving on to the SkyRunner Charadrius. This dungeon, it's the easiest dungeon in the game by a country mile. Even on hard mode, none of the fights were hard if you just went to the informant and learned how to fight them ahead of time. It's cool being able to kind of infiltrate the SkyRunner Charadrius. This is the one moment that I had to really suspend disbelief that this worked, or that they would believe, not even that it worked, because even if Luis knew they were doing this, I don't think he would have said anything. It's alluded to that he might have known they were doing all of these things, right? As it was happening, or like shortly thereafter. Even if he did know and just didn't care and let them do their thing, whatever. I don't understand how they thought this would work. It is such an unimaginably bold plan to just really hope that people would be too proud based on their strength. It's kind of cartoonish in a way that other pieces of the game aren't, that these generals are so proud that they would not squeal and say that they gave their keys away to these random upstarts, right? Who just got here and who are working their way up the bridge. So that's the only... I don't like that. I don't think that the stealth sections were that engaging or that great, all things considered. They were fine. It was different. I see what they were trying to do, but the bosses weren't hard. The stealth wasn't that fun, and I had to really suspend disbelief. I didn't love it. I think what they were trying to do was really interesting, having it be this gauntlet of bosses that each have a very unique win condition to be able to win the fight. And it's essentially a skill check at this point in the game. Except it's still pretty easy to muscle through it, even though it's supposed to be a skill check. And so the ending of it is really cool. You know, I'm always going to praise the awakenings because they're all really well done. Juna's awakening's the weakest, though. You know? She just kind of figures it out. She doesn't have this big emotional revelation like the rest of them do. She just is like, oh, I can probably do this, because she's hyper intelligent. And I do think that serves her character well, because she is hyper intelligent and very familiar with magic, and, you know, that comes with her coming from the Mages Academy. So I think that is really good. But even the surfing, you know, the sword surfing piece of it, I don't know. Nothing fully landed for me. I felt like the sword surfing should have been more epic. I felt like the fight with Gladel was fine, but stunningly easy because it was just you and Juna, so you didn't have the full your full strength there, so they couldn't make it too hard, because it's you and a new character with an archetype that you couldn't customize in any way, shape, or form. The story impact of us realizing that we have enough renown now after the events of the Martyra arc is cool, and that we're protected by the King's magic now is cool. I'm a put SkyRunner Charadrius in C. I'm even gonna put it below the Sandworm's Nest. I don't love it. That's a me thing. If you disagree, that's fine. I just don't. I don't love it at all. I actually kind of don't. It's not that I don't not look forward to it. Like, I just am so ambivalent to it, and I would almost rather not look forward to it than be fully ambivalent towards it. I just don't care about this. I like the Awakening just because I like all of the Awakenings, but it's also the Awakening that I like the least, so it's fine. Now, narratively having it interspersed, the dinner party aspects of it that are happening parallel to what Will is doing on the SkyRunner, the dinner party is really cool. Stroll really shines in that dinner party, but I don't think that the things that are actively not happening in the dungeon, even though it is narratively a part of it, a part of the puzzle, I just don't feel like it brings it up enough. I'll put it above. Actually, I will put it above the giant Sandworm's Nest. But that's about as high as I can really justify it. Which sucks, because I really like Brylehaven as a city. Yeah. Yes, EDMG. I don't think I could have said it any better. These are the people who gave us Persona 5. The infiltration game. Like, they made an entire game about satisfying infiltration missions, and this just did not do the job. Looking at the Dragon Temple, I think that the Virga Islands are some of the most interesting, like, collection of locales in the entire game. I think the music is always on point. I think that the culture of the Mustari people, really cool. And I think that overall, the narrative is firmly in its stride when we are at this point in the story. The Dragon Temple itself is, and I know I'm not the first person to say this, not fun. It's not fun. Navigating the first part of the Dragon Temple is tedious. Yes, seeing all of those murals and having it kind of give that generalized history of the world and how civilization fell is one of the coolest things in the game. We're finally getting answers about this world, right? But the dark and having to look at the ceiling the whole time to be able to navigate through that initial labyrinth, it was cool. It was cool. But it was almost too telegraphed, right? It was too telegraphed. EDMG, it's a copy paste from Etrian Odyssey. That's really funny. It was too telegraphed. So it's like, you need to figure it out. But the second you look up and see you just need to follow the line, it becomes so easy that now it's just kind of slogging through, going through it, because you have to follow the line. I don't know that making it more difficult would have necessarily fixed the problem. It might have made it worse. But I don't love this solution. And there are, like, interesting labyrinthian puzzles that they do in a later dungeon that I think works way better than this. Once we find Yuffie halfway through and we start traveling with her, I think that Yuffie is one of the best characters in the game, bar none. Potentially the best character in the game. It's because throughout this, She has committed herself to giving her life for her people. Admirable. Absolutely admirable in every definition of the word. So having us kind of, as the protagonist's entourage, as the partisans, kind of talking to her and learning about her and figuring out why she has rationalized this as we move through the dungeon, really, really cool. And I would say one of the most impactful story moments in the game was getting to know her as she has kind of accepted her fate in this world, right? So when we go down and we see the ruins of Japan, I have not played Etrian Odyssey. Full transparency. I have not played Etrian Odyssey. I'm familiar with what people are saying about the similarities between Etria and the dungeon within Etria and Etrian Odyssey. It's not super subtle on Atlus's part. But I was not expecting this, and I was blown away. Being like, whoa. And then this second half, I will say, was really cool. Because they had little things. They were like CDs and like phones and, modern technology just strewn around this skyscraper that folks would comment on and be like, what is this? How did they use this? Why is this like this? Maybe is this a throwing star? When it's clearly a CD, but they don't know that because they don't have CDs. And I think those little touches, it's not like they did anything for the game. It's not like collect all of them and you unlock this powerful weapon. It's just small little flavor here and there and little notes scattered throughout that talked about the impending doom of the world. It all adds so much texture that didn't necessarily need to be there, but texture nonetheless to the game that was so good and so welcome that I really loved. In that respect, I think that was fun to navigate. What wasn't fun to navigate were the ears. I did not love Homo Flamo or its little illusions, right? They're scattered throughout the level that move as we move. 1 was cool. 2 was fine. It just got to be a little bit too much. And it kept it interesting. It kept it dynamic. But with it being such a long dungeon, nonetheless, it just was frustrating. But it didn't hamper my enjoyment of this second half that much because I was so fascinated by the environment we were in. Aesthetically, it was so strong, and the impact of it was so surprising that even though the move when it moves, it wasn't that hard, it was just kind of tedious. And the monsters here gave enough of a challenge that I was in. I did not feel safe. I did not feel secure. It was challenging, but not unfair. And I loved that. And so, once we get to the end of the dungeon, we move through everything. And we realize, when we realize that Yufa giving her life was likely just a semantical misunderstanding. It was a misunderstanding of... When we realize that Yufa giving her life was just a misunderstanding of semantics, and that she is giving her life for her people in that she will give her life to serve her people, not quite literally dying for her people, and the ripple effects that realization from outsiders on something that is so ingrained in this culture, them recognizing that and saying, no, you're not supposed to die, you're supposed to give your all for your people, and that realization dawning on her that she doesn't need to die, one of the best moments in a JRPG. Easily. And Hulkenberg role in that was incredible. Incredible. Hulkenberg so often becomes kind of like a meme in this game. Like, she loves eating. She eats so much weird stuff, whatever. But in this dungeon, she really showed her nobility. She showed just how honorable she is, and she showed just how much she cares about Yuffie. You know, this person she's just met, because that's what this party does. They help people. And Yuffie, above all, needed their help. I would agree, Balneon. It's not my favorite arc in the game, but it is up there. It is absolutely up there. With all of that, you know, the fact that the human was quite literally wearing a Mustari mask, I would say, frustrations and all, I would give the Dragon Temple an A. I would put the Dragon Temple in A tier. I think it does what it does really well. You know, I don't agree with all of the design decisions. I think that the boss fights and the narrative beats are so strong, though, and that the context it gives into the United Kingdom of Uchronia from a perspective that has been untainted by the Sanctus Church is so good that it deserves A tier. It absolutely deserves A tier. The Montario Opera House. What a fascinating dungeon this was. Again, I'm gonna use the phrase dungeon loosely. It is a fetch quest. It is a fetch quest. It is a trading sequence from The Legend of Zelda that leads into a couple hallways of ascending ladders and staircases, and then a boss fight with Luis. It's cool. I like it. I like it a lot, even. However, the most elite dungeon in the game, it is not. I'm gonna lump all of the cutscenes of the Montario Opera House into it, because there's just not enough dungeon itself. And this is where all of the massive revelations happen. This is where we kill Luis, then he's alive, then we fight Luis, and then we kill him again, and then he's actually dead, and then Forden is like, alright, he's dead, so I'm the king. And then Luis shows up again, and then he kills Forden, and then everything just goes off the rails here. And I was sat for every moment. I've seen people say that they thought that it was too many plot twists all at the same time. I can't help but disagree. I thought that the chaos was really kind of lending itself to something that was very Luis in nature. He lives for that kind of chaos and that unpredictability, while he's kind of blasé throughout the whole thing. He wasn't expecting to have died, or essentially died, but he had a backup plan with Zorba should something like that happen. Overall, it shows just how good of a leader, or just how good of a strategist, I should say, that Luis actually is. The dungeon itself, though, rather boring. Doesn't look that great. It's all in the cutscenes. All of the bread and butter of this are in the cutscenes. The fight on top of the Opera House is iconic in every definition of the word. But it also can't be ignored that we don't have any dungeons beside this in the Montario arc. This is the dungeon from the Montario arc. I'll put this one, no, I'm going to put it top of C. There's no real Montario dungeon. And this just didn't scratch the itch. Narratively, it was really, really cool. But I can't help that it was a missed opportunity. We had so much time in Montario. I just wish it was longer. I just wish it was longer. It was so short. And the boss fight with Luis was really well done. But it was just kind of one fight, and then it was done. With so much build up to it, I thought it should have been something more. The death of Forden is fantastic. I liked that. I almost liked the anticlimax of Forden's death. And I think that Fidelio as a character peaked in this area in the best way possible right before he died. And I think that works so well. Fidelio is one of my favorite characters in the game, bar none. So the Skybound Avatar, though, we can call the Tyrant Star the final dungeon of the game, and it's technically true. But this is the final dungeon of the game, and it is really well done. It is fun to navigate, and I think that's the biggest piece. It's broken out into different segments as you're attacking the different guardians that you need to destroy that have been corrupted, right? And going through the hedge maze at the very beginning, defeating the Homo Flamos there. While I didn't like them in the Dragon Temple, I think they worked really well in the hedge maze, in the garden of the castle. And with each segment being blocked off by the dissenting voices that don't believe in you and that don't want you to be king and who still hate you, right? And that's what's blocking your path through the palace. Such an interesting idea and so well done. And by defeating these guardians, that's sending all of this negativity into the people and having that help to calm them down. And then our supporters are in turn breaking these barriers down for us, because a king is only as strong as his supporters. And I think that this dungeon really emphasized that theme. It made it known. And contrasting Will with his father, Will, who is so determined to move forward, whereas his father, the king, is so full of doubt. You can't ask for better storytelling than that, at least not in my opinion. That environmental storytelling of him being able to see the shade of his father, kind of grappling with his kinghood, grappling with his grief, and losing in that process as you are going through the Skybound Avatar. I loved every moment of it, because now I'm understanding why the king was the way he was and how he got to the point that he did in, by the beginning of the game when he dies at the hand of Luis. Yeah, all of the groundwork, I agree, Battle. All of the groundwork that you have laid throughout the course of the game really comes to fruition in this moment. Like, this is what you've been working for. That affirmation. You see your followers, whether it's Barden, whether it's the former candidates, whether it's, Marie, you see all of your followers as you're progressing through the dungeon, and they are opening the way for you. And I think that is such a cool and impactful way to move through this, Skybound Avatar, this final dungeon. And the navigation, where you go into one door and appear somewhere else because the area has been distorted by Magla, all the while, really intensely strong monsters like the Grim Reaper are trying to get you as you move through. It's disorienting in a really good way, and it made me actually scratch my head as I was moving through the dungeon, but in a way that I enjoyed, right? In the Dragon Temple, they had some navigational stuff where it made me scratch my head and I was frustrated until I figure out the very easy answer. This answer, while it has a definitive answer, it took a little bit time for me to riddle out the pattern of how I needed to progress through this area. Go through this door, pop out, 2 doors back or something like that. It was so, so good. And having Zorba be the final boss and kind of the narrative paralleling, I keep saying that in this stream, but they do so well with paralleling. The first true dungeon in the game is the Grand Cathedral, right? And the final boss of that is Zorba. And after you defeat him, he falls off the side of the Grand Cathedral. The final boss of this dungeon, also in Grand Trad, is Zorba. And at the end, he falls off. And his body, careening to the ground, warped and distorted, being half human, essentially, is kind of the aha moment for so many of the people below of the horrors that are occurring up top that we are now confronting. And I have to say, I love Batlin, one of the best characters. You know, I wish he had a follower link because he is so good. And him showing, hey, is this what you want? Is this your future? Is this what you want your king to be, you know, aligning himself with? So Skybound Avatar really fires on all cylinders. I would call Skybound Avatar S tier. I would call Skybound Avatar an S tier dungeon, which leaves us with the Tyrant Star. This dungeon is fine. It's fine. It looks cool. But it's just kind of a world of ruin. You know what I mean? There's not much to it. It's tough enemies, a world of ruin. It is an area specifically intended for you to be able to grind if you don't feel you are a high enough level by the end. There are enough teeth for you to grind. You have the really big teeth. There's so many opportunities for you to grind here. You have the eternal sleeps. This is a grinding area just to make sure that if you get stuck, you can get to the end of the game. And that's all it is. You know, the boss rush that is optional is cool. It's fun. It gives you really good weapons. You know, it's a really easy way to get some of the best weapons in the game. None of the bosses are particularly difficult. But, you know, I did it my first time through, and it genuinely helped with the final boss. That said, the Luis boss fights, the final Luis boss fights in this game are some of my favorite final boss fights in any game that I have ever played. They are so well constructed to be difficult, but not unfair. Unless you decide not to go through the gauntlet of bosses that you will be refighting, and you just decide to fully take on Luis raw, right? With him at full strength, and it is Destroyer Charadrius. He is not fair. Now, I don't mean that he's not unkillable. He's very killable. But you need a strategy to be able to kill him. Destroyer Charadrius is no joke. And I'm sure a lot of people have gone to Destroyer Charadrius, Luis at full strength, without killing the optional bosses, and just been horrified at the difficulty spike at the end of the game. And I think that's kind of really funny, because they warned you. They said, you should kill all of these things before you head to Luis. It's probably a really good idea. They make it very explicit. And so having done both, I think that, you know, narratively, I don't think that, you know, killing these bosses again does anything crazy. It gives you a couple extra moments with the party and like, remember this. It's a fun kind of victory lap at the end of the game. I don't know. I think Tyrant Star is fun, and the final boss and the culmination of the game is incredible. So for that reason, I am going to put the Tyrant Star, I'm going to put it in, I'm going to say the final boss is part of it, so I'm going to put it in A tier. Oh, the more fights. Yes, of course the more fights. The Morphites are also exceptional. Great. I can't believe I forgot to mention it, but such a good culmination to that aspect of the story as well. Not difficult fights, but it's not meant to be. The Morphites are not supposed to be difficult. They're supposed to be impactful, and they achieve that in dividends, in absolute dividends. And so this is my list. This is my tier list for Metaphor ReFantazio. The only thing that I am second guessing is I think that Nord Mines, I don't think it compares to Cren Castle and the Skybound Avatar. I think I'm gonna bump the Nord Mines to the top of A, but I'm gonna bump it down to A. I don't think it deserves to stand with these two. I do think that Nord Mines is better than the Dragon Temple and the Tyrant Star. I really do. I think it's that good of a beginning, but I don't think it's as good as these other two. I think overall, this is some of the greatest collection of dungeons in a game I've played. My only consistent criticism is that I wish they were more visually distinct throughout. We have some real highlights like the Dragon Temple and Cren Castle, but besides those two, and kinda SkyRunner Charadrius, kinda, but overall, I would say that the main dungeons and even the side dungeons are a little bit bland looking, is the best way for me to describe them. I just wish more of them had more defined personality. So let me know, do you agree with my thoughts on what the best dungeons are? Do you think I am completely off base? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. And if you want to see Metaphor Mondays live, make sure to go follow me over on Twitch and subscribe to this YouTube channel where all the VODs are going to be posted at a little bit of an edited down version. So, as always, I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day, a fantastic rest of your week, and even a fantastic rest of your month. And I will see you in the next video. Later.